Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. Today we're undertaking a deep dive into a work that, well, it really reshaped my understanding of ancient history. It's Victor Davis Hanson's A War Like No Other, How the Athenians and Spartans Fought the Peloponnesian War. What makes this book and this conflict so compelling, I think, is how Hanson argues that this 27-year struggle between ancient Greek city-states still speaks volumes about human nature and, the very essence of war itself, even today.
Exactly. Hanson's brilliance, it really lies in how he distills these profound lessons from the Peloponnesian War, which was, as you know, a brutal civil strife between fellow Greeks from 431 to 404 BC. Unlike the Persian Wars, this wasn't some foreign conflict. It was Greeks fighting Greeks. And the sheer scale of the devastation, the lives lost, it was immense. Throughout the book, Hanson consistently explores, well, three core themes. There's the unchanging nature of human conflict, the radical transformation of warfare that happened during these decades, and the profound, enduring legacies of the struggle that still echo. He really posits that there's this timeless, almost universal human element to war that, transcends time and space.
So how did these vastly different powers, Athens and Sparta, actually come to blows? What were their fundamental strengths and weaknesses? How did that set the stage for such a prolonged conflict?
Well, on one side, you had Athens, democratic, seafaring, an imperial power, almost an elephant on the sea, right? Drawing its strength from trade and naval dominance and this vast network of allies and subjects. And then on the other side, Sparta, oligarchic, land-based, the whale, as it's often dubbed. Its prestige relied on its elite hoplite infantry, those heavily armed citizen soldiers, and control over a large agrarian territory. Thucydides, the great historian of the war, he strongly believed the true root cause was basically Spartan fear of Athens' growing power and its democratic imperialism. It was almost a preemptive strike born out of apprehension about Athens' expanding influence, an assessment that, has drawn comparisons to the Cold War.
Right, the Cold War analogy, two superpowers
Yeah.
initially allied.
Exactly, facing off for decades. This fear, Hansen suggests, is a perennial driver of conflict. It's timeless.
And while that underlying fear was simmering, what were the immediate grievances, the sparks that actually ignited this powder keg?
Right, the sparks. Well, there were disputes involving Corcyra. You had Corinth and Corcyra fighting at sea, and Athens sided with Corcyra. Then there was Megara chafing under Athenian trade embargo, looking for Spartan support. And the nearby island of Aegina complaining about Athenian interference. These smaller, seemingly isolated incidents, they became the undeniable triggers for the larger war.
So when the war did break out, what were Sparta's initial assumptions, their strategies? And did they actually work?
Well, Sparta's initial strategy in 431 BC was remarkably traditional and ultimately pretty unimaginative. Their plan involved annual invasions of Attica, the goal. Destroy farmland and draw the Athenians out for a decisive hoplite battle in the open. Even King Archidamus, their own king, warned his followers in vain, mind you, about Athenian strengths, their wealth, ships, cavalry, weaponry, allies, their vast population. He stressed that Athens could only be opposed with sufficient Peloponnesian money and ships, recognizing Athens could augment its hinterland with much more farmland abroad.
But Pericles, the Athenian leader, he had this counter-strategy that seems almost, prescient. How did he envision Athens fighting this war? Basically from behind walls.
Yeah, Pericles ordered the complete withdrawal of the entire Attic population behind the massive long walls. This huge network of fortifications connecting Athens to its port at Piraeus. It allowed Athens to rely entirely on its naval power and its imported food supply, essentially turning the city into an impregnable island fortress. Pericles was a unique leader. His moral authority, his experience, it allowed him to rein in both the conservative farmers and the democratic extremists. He guided the city systematically. His serene visage, the one you see in his busts, it reflected a concern with monumental issues, not really arrogance.
Okay, so Sparta's traditional approach, burning crops, versus Pericles' innovative reliance on walls and naval power. What was the real impact of Sparta's agrarian warfare? Especially when Athens could just import everything.
This is where it gets really interesting, and Hansen emphasizes this point strongly. It was the profound ineffectiveness of Sparta's traditional agrarian warfare against Athens. The Peloponnesians quickly learned that permanent plants, like olive trees and grapevines, are incredibly tough to actually fell, let alone set on fire permanently. Even just scorching the leaves or blackening the bark, it didn't do lasting damage. And more critically, Athens' imported grain supply, arriving daily through the Piraeus from places like southern Russia, Asia Minor, It made burning local crops far less impactful than they expected. As the Corinthian allies themselves critiqued, your methods, compared to those of the Athenians, are old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned.
Exactly. It was a rude awakening for an army used to a sort of parochial tactic against rural neighbors. It really highlights how quickly established military doctrines can become obsolete.
The war then quickly spiraled into, well, unforeseen catastrophes. And nothing highlights this more than the devastating Athenian plague. What was truly devastating about it, beyond just the sheer number of deaths, how did Hanson explore its psychological, its strategic ripple effects?
Oh, the plague. From 430 to 426 BC, it was absolutely horrifying. Symptoms started with this violent heat in the head, burning red eyes, a bloody and malodorous throat and tongue. Then came sneezing, hoarseness, severe coughing, vomiting bile. Pustules covered the body, and the city's inhabitants crammed inside the long walls. People were dying in the streets. Disposing of thousands of corpses was this immense challenge. Thucydides noted it was the greatest suffering and killed a considerable part of the population.
That's unimaginable.
It really was. And Hanson points out it was actually more deadly than even the Sicilian fiasco years later.
Yeah.
Claimed twice as many Athenian lives. But this plague wasn't just a natural disaster. It became a catalyst for profound societal breakdown. It validates Hanson's argument about war's capacity to just erode the moral fabric. Thucydides' chilling account of people abandoning law and gods to live only for the day. It's not just history, it's a stark insight into human behavior under extreme duress. A pattern we've seen repeated throughout history, haven't we?
Definitely. And Pericles himself died from it.
He did, which left this massive leadership vacuum. And you even saw new religious cults like Asclepius being introduced to Athens in response.
So with the plague decimating Athens and traditional tactics proving ineffective, how did the actual fighting evolve? Did we see the end of those big hoplite battles?
We did, largely. There was a significant decline in decisive hoplite-pitched battles between the main powers. Traditional hoplite warfare, with its cumbersome armor. It seemed increasingly misguided, really. Instead, we saw the rise of light-armed warriors, the Siloi, the light guys, and the peltests with their crescent-shaped shields. Sieges became much more prevalent, and acts of terror became commonplace. What's fascinating here is how the war became increasingly brutal, even by ancient standards. Hanson argues this shift isn't just about new weapons. It's a deeper, unsettling truth about human conflict, that desperation can strip away established protocols and push combatants to extreme, often savage acts, as Thucydides himself called the Mytilene Revolt in 427 BC.
Mytilene really exemplifies this descent into brutality, doesn't it? Cleon initially wanted to slaughter thousands.
Yes, and ultimately about 1,000 were executed. Much of the island was ethnically cleansed and redistributed, just brutal.
But it wasn't just state-on-state violence, was it? We saw something even more horrifying happen internally within communities.
Absolutely. The brutality extended beyond state actions. We saw horrifying civil strife at Corcyra. Democrats and oligarchs engaged in widespread killing, slaves cutting down their masters, women joining the Democrats and pelting opponents from rooftops. This fury, it transcended strategic calculus. It highlighted an internal, often class-based, savagery that went far beyond what Athens or Sparta might have initially intended. It showed that once unleashed, this kind of violence just takes on a life of its own.
And then there's the infamous Melian dialogue. For many, this is the starkest moment in the war, a chilling exploration of might makes right. What makes it so pivotal in understanding the transformation of Athens and the war's brutality?
The Melian dialogue. 416 BC, it is just a stark and chilling example of this brutal shift. It's a magisterial exploration of moral right versus realpolitik, offering this timeless insight into how raw power can just strip away ethics in international relations. The once idealist Athenians, the ones who saved Greece from Persia, they declared that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Chilling words.
Absolutely, and it culminated in the slaughter of the Melians after their capitulation. No mercy offered. This wasn't just a historical event. It was a profound shift in Athenian self-perception, a deliberate embrace of ruthless pragmatism, and attacks on boys' schools like in Sion, another shocking form of psychological terror, deliberately targeting the most vulnerable. Just awful.
Amidst this escalating savagery, though, there were still surprising turns, moments where one side gained a significant, unexpected advantage. The Pylos episode stands out, right? A stunning psychological victory for Athens. What happened there?
Pylos, yes, 425 BC. That was indeed a major turning point, psychologically at least. It shamed Sparta into seeking peace. After Spartan hoplites were trapped and forced to surrender on the island of Sphacteria, Well, it was completely unexpected. Spartans simply did not surrender, so this incident was a profound shock to their reputation, and it momentarily altered the balance of power, compelling them to consider withdrawing from Attica.
You mentioned that large hoplite battles became rarer, but there were still a few. The Delium campaign comes to mind. What was the outcome there, and what did it signal about the changing nature of warfare?
Right. Delium in 424 BC was one of the few major hoplite battles. It actually ended in an Athenian defeat. And controversially, the Boeotians decided to hold the Athenian dead hostage until their sanctuary was cleared. This showcased the abandonment of old protocols, marking a complete break with past experience and the sort of niceties of agrarian warfare. It's another example of Hanson's theme, war becoming a destroyer of protocol, privilege, and tradition.
Speaking of folly, let's turn to the grand folly. The Sicilian expedition, 415 to 413 BC. Athens, riding this wave of renewed confidence, was drawn by Sicily's vast agricultural land, its population. What was the strategic thinking, or perhaps misthinking, behind this incredibly ambitious undertaking?
Well, Athens envisioned ending Peloponnesian food imports from Sicily and gaining new military assets. Big prize. However, the internal Athenian debate leading up to this expedition was fraught. Nicias, the cautious general, issued these dire warnings, much like Archidamus's warnings to Sparta years earlier, but they were ignored. And the command structure itself was problematic. A troika, the cautious Nicias, the reliable Lamachus, and the controversial Alcibiades, truly a recipe for disaster.
You'd expect Athens to target their oligarchic enemies, but the Sicilian expedition took them to Syracuse, a democratic city. What was the strategic logic or illogic behind that decision, and how did it play out?
That's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Syracuse was democratic, most similar to Athens, strong in ships and horses. This decision to attack a democratic neutral rather than an oligarchic enemy, it defied the usual Athenian revolutionary fervor. And ultimately, it proved to be a critical misstep. It highlights how even seemingly rational strategic decisions can be clouded by overconfidence or maybe internal political pressures leading to just disastrous outcomes.
And adding to this unfolding tragedy, Alcibiades, one of the co-commanders, gets exiled and then turns traitor. How did his actions impact the war, especially Sicily and beyond?
Alcibiades' treachery after his exile was devastating. Absolutely devastating. He fled Athens and, with the zeal of a convert, advised the Spartans on two crucial things. First, fortify Decilia and Attica permanently. Second, build a formidable fleet with Persian help. This intelligence proved absolutely crucial to Athens' eventual downfall. It enabled the Spartans to cut off Athens' land access and choke its imported supplies, a strategic move that would cripple Athens in the long term.
So Alcibiades' betrayal, internal division, and then the actual campaign itself was just a disaster. Can you describe the horrifying culmination of the Sicilian expedition, particularly that final slaughter?
Oh, the Sicilian campaign was indeed a catastrophe from start to finish, pretty much. Initial delays, the critical lack of adequate cavalry, a failed night attack against Syracusan counterfortifications. It plagued the Athenians. The campaign culminated in a horrific slaughter at the Asinaris River. We're talking about 18,000 men killed in just a few hours.
18,000.
If that figure's true, it represents the greatest single-day fatality rate in classical Greek warfare. Staggering. And another 7,000 Athenians were imprisoned in quarries. A truly grim and debilitating end to the whole affair.
That's an unimaginable loss. This period also saw a significant evolution in naval warfare, which is supposed to be Athens' strength. How did the Syracusans adapt? How did they eventually counter Athenian naval superiority?
Right, naval warfare with triremes, those swift war galleys, it was incredibly expensive, both to build and maintain, and required immense human investment, 170 to 200 seamen per ship. The Syracusans adapted brilliantly to Athenian naval superiority. Really brilliantly. They learned to fight effectively in confined waters, where Athenian agility was less of an advantage. They used new types of rams to hit Athenian ships head-on, and they even drove stakes into the harbor bed to neutralize Athenian speed and maneuverability. This innovation and adaptability against Athens' long-held naval advantage perfectly illustrates Hanson's theme of warfare, constantly transforming, forcing new tactics and technologies.
As the war entered its endgame, the impact of Decilia, fortified by Sparta on Alcibiades' advice, became devastating. How did that permanent Spartan garrison in Attica really grind Athens down?
Decilia, fortified by the Spartans in 413 BC, it served as this permanent garrison right in Attica. It meant constant plundering of the countryside. It drove tens of thousands of slaves to desert, further eroding Athens' agrarian and economic base. It was a constant bleed. And zooming out, as Alcibiades advised, it was Persia's financial support that ultimately enabled Sparta to finally build that formidable fleet. Without Persian gold, Sparta, a landlocked state with no real money of its own, could never have mounted such a sustained naval challenge. That really shifted the balance in the final phase, the Ionian War.
We then saw a series of decisive naval battles, and Athens actually achieved several victories, right, even leading to Spartan peace offers. But Athens, perhaps blinded by overconfidence, rejected them. Can you talk about these battles and what they revealed about Athens' internal struggles?
Yeah, that's right. Athens achieved significant victories at Cynossema, Abydos, and Cyzicus. They were doing well at sea again, so much so that Sparta actually sent out peace feelers, offering a return to the pre-war status quo. A pretty good offer, really. But Athens foolishly rejected them, convinced of their renewed naval supremacy, a fatal mistake in hindsight. Then came the tragic Athenian victory at Arginusae.
A tragic victory. How so?
Well, they won the battle, but afterwards 6 of the 10 victorious generals were executed back in Athens for failing to retrieve survivors and the bodies of the dead after a storm hit. This indicated a kind of terminal illness in Athenian decision-making. Hanson points this out. It showed a city that often blamed itself more in victory than defeat, a clear sign of the internal division and moral decay, he highlights.
And that leads us to the final devastating blow, the Battle of Aegospotami. What happened there, and what was the ultimate consequence for Athens?
Aegospotami, 405 BC. That was the endgame. Lysander, the Spartan admiral, launched a brilliant surprise attack. He caught the Athenian fleet beached. He destroyed or captured 170 out of 180 Athenian triremes, just wiped them out. And what followed was an abhorrent execution of 3,000 to 4,000 captured Athenian crews. They spared only the allies and slaves. Hanson notes this as the worst single-day execution of Greeks in the entire war, a brutal testament to the war's escalating savagery and the complete abandonment of any form of restraints.
The war's narrative then concludes with Lysander's entry into the Piraeus. What was the symbolic significance of that moment for Athens, for its imperial dream?
Lysander entered the Piraeus in April 404 BC, and the hated long walls, the symbol of Athenian power and strategy, were torn down to the music of flutes. This was a symbolic, definitive end to Athenian independence and its imperial dream. Just gone. Athenian democracy was replaced by the oligarchic rule of the 30 tyrants, a harsh regime that further butchered citizens. It was a complete and utter collapse for what had been the most powerful, most dynamic city-state in Greece.
That's a truly powerful and, well, tragic conclusion to this long, brutal war. But, as Hanson argues, the significance of the Peloponnesian War extends far beyond its immediate outcome. What are the profound long-term legacies he emphasizes for us to consider?
Yeah, putting this into context, Hanson argues the war created these profound long-term legacies. And they're really worth thinking about. First, there was a radical transformation of warfare, a definitive shift toward siegecraft, combined arms tactics, the end of this sort of romance of hoplite battle. It demonstrated that adaptability, not just traditional strength, wins wars.
Okay, so warfare changed. What else?
Second, immense social and economic impact. Widespread disruption of rural life, a massive loss of wealth, particularly for Athens, and a changing social balance due to those huge naval losses. War, he argues, is a destroyer of protocol, privilege, and tradition. It shakes everything up. Third, a significant philosophical shift. Greek thinkers like Aristophanes and Euripides, writing during and after the war, began to question war's nobility. They started seeing it as nonsensical, suicidal even, a marked departure from earlier, more idealized views of conflict.
Interesting, a change in how people even thought about war.
Exactly. And finally, Hanson's central argument, the idea of enduring human nature, especially in war. The commonalities of fear, strategy, ambition, brutality, calculation, they remain constant, which allows us to learn profound lessons from conflicts millennia ago that, he argues, resonate directly with our own strategic dilemmas today.
So what does this all mean for us? This deep dive into the Peloponnesian War through Hanson's lens, it really reveals how these ancient conflicts echo in our own strategic dilemmas, our own human responses. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that while technology changes, the core drivers of human conflict often do not.
It absolutely is. And this raises an important question, I think, for you listening. In a world where information spreads instantly, where perceived weaknesses can invite swift action, what lessons can we draw from Athens and Sparta's struggle? Lessons about the cost of complacency, perhaps, the dangers of internal division, and that enduring human tendency towards both brilliance and brutality in conflict. What stands out to you from this deep dive?